So we're live and alive here at Chabad House, celebrating Lag BaOmer, and let's talk about the deepest connection is the simplest one, because sometimes we overcomplicate stuff. And Rabbi Goldman, who's the rabbi at Siddim Shul for many, many years, likes to say, good idea for rabbis is KISS. Keep it simple, smarty. So we're going to try to keep it simple. We were talking about Rabbi Shimon, and today is his yahrzeit. And we light these fires to observe and to celebrate his yahrzeit. Because after all, Rabbi Shimon was a great luminary, a suppository of Torah. And we want to get a taste of that inspiration that he taught. Throughout our lives, we make a lot of commitments. That's something we like to do. We say we're going to be somewhere at a certain time. Oy vey. We say we're going to do whatever thing. And some people do. I know people binge watch. I don't know what it is with me. I don't get into the movies and those kinds of stuff, but people do it. I know a tub of ice cream is a different story. A tub of ice cream I could get through. I could finish. Whatever the commitments are, whether we made them to our spouse or to our children or to our office or to, you could think of all the other places, most of the time we're able to explain the reason why we chose to dedicate ourselves to that particular pursuit, right? Maybe, for example, we promised not to eat another carb because we wanted to fit into our suits for Yom Tov or for the next Simcha. And thank God it is a time of Simchas. It's Lag BaOmer, got a big wedding tonight. In fact, I got 2 weddings. I got next week more weddings. And then next month in Israel weddings. So there's a lot of exciting events. And we have a reason, a rationale why we're going to do whatever we want. And that's fine. But there are some commitments that I think cannot be explained with logic. Why does a husband sit at his wife's bedside, hold her hand after the doctors have given up hope? We've seen that scenario. Why does a mother pick up her child from rehab after a 3rd relapse, despite their disappointment in certain behaviors? Maybe why have thousands of Jews throughout history chosen the sword over the cross? You get the gist? Strict logic would tell us that you move on, that maybe they gave up on the commitment that you made years back. I never made that commitment. Who made the commitment? It was long before me. Why do I have to give up my life for something that wasn't my commitment? But we know. Did you make the figures? Hold on a second. It's the wrong slide you're watching. I don't know why. Give it a second. Now I realize we're watching the wrong slide altogether. So let's see what we could do. Screen, back screen, white screen, swap displays, use slideshow. My apologies. Is that better? Okay. I don't know how that happened, but okay. So what's the point? When somebody tells us you're being irrational, do we become defensive to that? Why? We think ideally as human beings, we should be rational. We make decisions based on, they make sense to us, right? After all, it's only our intellect that separates us from other animals. Now, of course, animals have intellect too. I better be clear. But we have a different set of intellectual faculties. So what are the unconditional commitments that we might have in life? Are they an expression of our humanity, or are they a deviation? Is there value to blind commitment? So the idea we want to talk about today relating to Lag BaOmer, about the life of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. And the answer to the question that we could see between the lines based on the story of his life and his teachings. Let's look at his history. Who was he? Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai was a 1st century Talmudic sage who is known for his contributions to Jewish law and mysticism. Also, there are many statements in the Mishnah and the Talmud that are attributed to him. He authored the most comprehensive and authoritative text on Jewish esoteric wisdom, known as Zohar. And he passed away on this day in the year 160 of the Common Era. How long ago is that? Long time ago. That's about, what, 1,840 years ago? Does that make sense? If we're now in 2026, so 1,844 years ago? 46 years ago.
It's an angle.
You'll have to help me out with the numbers. I'm really not good at that. Either way, that was some time ago. But yet, his teachings, his wisdom, that's what we're celebrating today. That's what part of what Lag BaOmer is all about. We discussed yesterday the students of Rabbi Akiva. He was one of Rabbi Akiva's students. He passed away on this day. But as we were discussing, he didn't want his passing to be seen as a tragedy, but a celebration. And as we read some of the stories about Rabbi Shimon, we learn a few of his teachings, we discover a very interesting paradox. From one angle, Rabbi Shimon was an extremely lofty man, constantly in a state of love of God, spending his time studying Torah. As I mentioned to you, he didn't like when he saw other people squandering their time. You have all the time in the world that you could be focused on other things, right? He didn't like if people were involved and engaged in other pursuits. He didn't like the idea that spend your time on earning a living. A little bit. Yeah, you gotta survive. But that's really where you want to spend your time? Now, such lofty people who are like that are oftentimes aloof and removed from the common person. Was Rabbi Akiva like that? Was he in touch with people and their struggles, and did he find ways that he connect, that he relate to people? I saw this morning, I don't know if it's today, but I think it's today, Rabbi Eitan Ash being interviewed on Chai FM. Unless it's was it this morning? Oh, so it must be a replay podcast. So look, he's the rabbi of this shul right here. And I found what he said something quite profound. Rabbi Ash was saying that once upon a time, rabbis tended to be, the pulpit rabbi was more aloof, was more separate. And at the end of the day, people want a rabbi as a regular human like themselves that they can relate with. Maybe we wear a different hat, maybe we have a different title, different job, but at the end of the day, we're all the same humans. So Rabbi Shimon was known to be, on the one hand, while he had a perspective, a viewpoint, but he was also a person who was relatable with the people. His son, on the other hand, he was a little bit more aloof. So we have to understand what was Rabbi Shimon's, I guess, his secret, his formula. How was he able to harbor these lofty perspectives that he felt a person shouldn't, engage in earthly pursuits and shouldn't squander and waste their time? And I'm sure we ourselves too. Do we not sometimes feel, I don't know, you watched a film or you were scrolling on your phone or you read something that you felt like, did I do anything meaningful in the past hour? Do you ever feel that way? Do you ever look back at life and say, gosh, where did the years fly? Did I use my time purposefully, meaningfully? It's an important question to ask ourselves. Because what are we essentially doing with our time? On that note, please God, in a month's time, I'm going to go to Israel for 10 days for a few weddings, as I mentioned. I decided this time I'm not going myself. I'm bringing my kids, 2 of my kids with. Thank God we have accommodation with family there, so I don't have to worry about that. I'm not going to be going on a tour, a big tour. They're little kids. I'm taking 2 of my little kids under bar mitzvah and bat mitzvah. Well, my daughter's bat mitzvah year. Let them have some of the experience too. Let them be part of the journey. Let it be a meaningful experience that we don't look back and say, I just went for work. I only went to officiate weddings. Let's go and be part of the simcha. Let's go there. Let the kids be part of it too. So that's, now, whether I'll look back afterwards later on and say, why did I do that? I don't know. Taking them off school for a couple of days, I don't know if that's so clever. But anyways, we'll see. We'll make the best of it. They'll catch up, exactly. What's my point? Is that we have to understand about life and commitments that I think we can learn from Rabbi Shimon. Because Rabbi Shimon was quite a personality, and there's a lot for us to learn from him. So the thing that we have to understand about him, there's a subject in the Talmud. It's about the appointment of judges to the Sanhedrin, or today to Beis Din. We're going to see Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai's opinion about who's worthy for such an appointment. And in order to go into that, anybody want that position? The Beis Din here is looking right now for a Rosh Beth Din. Any of you want the position? No, you sure? So let's see what Rabbi Shimon had to say about that. Let's just see if the text came in. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. Okay. I don't know where it is. We're going to have to just... The Gemara says, originally all the judges would approve of and appoint only their disciples. For example, Rabbi Akiva appointed his students, Rabbi Meir, and guess who? Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, as the judges of the Sanhedrin. Now, because Rabbi Meir was older than Rabbi Shimon, Rabbi Akiva said, let Rabbi Meir preside first. He would be the Nasi, he would be the leader, the Rosh Beth Din. And Rabbi Shimon blushed, thinking that his teacher thought of him inferior. Rabbi Akiva assured him, let it suffice for you to know that only your Creator and I recognize your true ability. So Rabbi Akiva, a teacher of more than 24,000 students, as we discussed yesterday, he knew many sages in his time. He knew many of the great people. We know these sages through the Mishnah. For Rabbi Shimon to receive such an opulent praise from a spiritual giant, that's no small feat. And this is the first window that we get into Rabbi Shimon's greatness, into his holiness, into being a man of God. So there's another interesting Talmudic anecdote on the topic of Rabbi Shimon's eminence. And this was very interestingly made by Rabbi Shimon himself. So we'll have to understand that. But here it goes. The Gemara tells us, Va'amar Chizkiah, Chizkiah said in the name of Rabbi Yirmiyah, who in turn said in the name of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. What did he say? Ra'isi b'nei aliyah v'heimu atin. I've seen, how do you translate b'nei aliyah? Members of the spiritually prominent. B'nei aliyah. Aloof. Spiritually prominent people. And how many are there? Very few. If they number 1,000, Rabbi Shimon said, my son and I are among them. If they number 100, my son and I are among them. And guess what? If they number only 2 spiritually prominent individuals in the world, my son and I are among them. So who are these very humble, you say? How does this make sense with humility? One of the great rabbis that we're celebrating today. How does this all make sense? So who are the Bnei Aliyah, the Gemara asks? And the Gemara tells us they see the divine presence through a bright partition and they can enter heaven without requesting permission. Very interesting stuff. Now, I hear the sentiment, the reaction about Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai's humility when he could say such a thing. Pardon? You're not allowed to lie, okay? No, I'm not saying it was arrogance. I believe there was a rabbi in the U.S., very short-lived. There was a rabbi who was considered to be the chief rabbi. And they introduced him once at the podium, and they said, and I'm forgetting the story, but basically, he had to correct them on a few things. He said, I'm not only the chief rabbi of America, I'm also the chief rabbi of Canada, and he had to throw in some more. But I don't think that Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai was like that. So Reb Moshe has a good explanation, says maybe it's just being truthful, right? I highly doubt that Rabbi Shimon said these words as he climbed onto the table at a party pounding his chest, look at me, right? And the editors of the Talmud, who obviously speak so much and rail against arrogance in the strongest of terms, as anyone familiar with the Talmud certainly is familiar, right? I don't think they would promote this story. Why would they include a story about the great Rabbi Shimon? There's something about this. So certainly as a great sage, Rabbi Shimon was tasked with sharing, as you said, the truth to his students, and whether they flattered him or otherwise, he was telling the truth. And it's interesting that the Talmud has this statement third hand. It was said by Chizkiah in the name of Rabbi Yirmiyah, who heard it from Rabbi Shimon. Now, Chizkiah lived actually 200 years after Rabbi Shimon. So it's interesting that he testifies hearing this from another rabbi who heard it from Rabbi Shimon. But regardless, I think the statement already speaks volumes about Rabbi Shimon. If we want to reduce the greatest of the great two individuals of his time, well, one of them was Rabbi Shimon. And the greatness here wasn't referring to physical prowess or other, what was he talking about? Bnei Aliyah, people of spiritual prominence. That's what he prided himself in. The ability to sense the spiritual dimension of reality, of having an open door to the heavenly realm. That's what Rabbi Shimon prided himself in. That's what he was talking about. Now, I think there's a lot to this. Do you guys want to get a little bit Kabbalistic, or should we not get too Kabbalistic today? What do you say? Huh? Yeah, you want to give it a try? If it gets too complicated, we'll move on. Who is his son? Rabbi Elazar. Yeah. So we're going to open some Kabbalah here, the Zohar. And we find a very interesting similar sentiment where two of Rabbi Shimon's disciples lavish their teacher with praise, and they say all kinds of amazing things. They say, all the cosmos go around in your honor, and God built the lower Jerusalem parallel to the upper one, and has crafted the walls and gates of the holy city. One can only enter the spiritual Jerusalem when the doors have been opened, and can only ascend when a ladder has been lowered for them. Who has the ability to open the city's gates, and for whom have the stairs been affixed? Guess who the students said it was for? Their teacher. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, they said, is the gatekeeper of secret wisdom and the builder of supernal rungs. And they said, it is written, all your males shall appear before the master, Hashem. Who is the master, Hashem? Well, before we talk about all these peculiar, interesting statements, it seems like they're equating God creating everything just for Rabbi Shimon. And they called him my master, the Lord. Well, Chassidus explains that they were not deifying Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. Rather, the one he represents. Who does Rabbi Shimon represent? Hashem. We all represent Hashem. The question is, do we represent Hashem? We should be. Certainly we should be. So we have to understand this, because in Kabbalistic teachings, we recognize that a tzaddik is not like other people who sometimes feel spiritual, but they're a complete conduit for godliness. And we can confidently speak of him in terms that's of such a lofty nature, which not the usual person can be spoken of in that way. Now, of course, that's why when you read Kabbalah, sometimes it's not very palpable. There's another statement about Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai that's found in the Zohar that speaks of just how much he was bound up with Hashem. What does it say in the Zohar? It says, I will help with my presence in the world, for I am merely a signpost for God. What does that mean? What's a signpost? What value does a signpost have outside of the item place towards which it is pointed. So you know the road where to go. This is how Rabbi Shimon felt about his relationship for God. He breathed, he ate, he slept godliness. That was his life. Rabbi Shimon was no ordinary camper. He was a paragon of transcendence. And so when we look at the Zohar and explore these teachings, Rabbi Shimon gives us a window into his inner world and expresses how he feels about divinity, about Torah. So let's look at a few of his teachings. One of the teachings says, Pasach Rabbi Shimon v'Amar. It's a teaching in the Zohar. Rabbi Shimon began his lecture saying, Ani ledoidi v'alai chukasai. The verse says, I am my beloved's, and his desire is toward me. And he explained, for all the days I've been tied up, down in this world, I've remained completely bound to God. He's describing his inextricable relationship with Hashem. He said, all my life I've contemplated the meaning of the verse, my soul shall boast that it is a protector in God. The humble shall hear thereof and be glad. If my soul boasts silently to itself, how can the humble hear of it? For my soul boasts in God, because she is one with him. My soul bursts with God's light, cleaves to Hashem, strives in Torah because of that light. It is this effort that I expend, cleaving to God through his commandments, that brings me to the world of souls where the righteous, the humble can hear me. This is the man who says that if there's only two people who are of B'nai Aliyah, of spiritual transcendent nature, that he's one of them. Yeah. So he was a very spiritually in tune person. Okay. And Rabbi Shimon is telling of his fiery relationship with God. And maybe he's telling us this so that we could emulate and try to see and to the best of our ability, live in a godly way in this world. So we see Rabbi Shimon's greatness about in a very spiritually transcendent way. Yeah. Why do I say fiery? He said fiery. Why did he say fiery? You tell us. Oh, okay. To me, fire represents passion, enthusiasm, and excitement. So it's not just living, as many people do, just a regular, ordinary life. But there was enthusiasm and a burn and a happy, okay. Fine, but just as anything that could be destructive could also be constructive. So to me, his element of the fiery relationship, I think, is a passionate and enthusiastic one. We definitely light a bonfire partly for that reason. Also, as we said yesterday, that the soul is represented by fire. Ner Hashem nishmas Adam. And so for ordinary person, we light a candle. When you have somebody who is so fiery, so I guess you light a bonfire. So on the one hand, we see he was a spiritually aloof person. But on the other hand, he was also a practical person. We have to understand that side too. On the one hand, he was luftik in the clouds. But on the other hand, he seems to live a life that is also grounded. Okay? So let's read another idea that's explained about him. There's a story in the Talmud about a disciple of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai who emigrated from Israel, and he came back to the Holy Land very wealthy. Sounds good. Made some money. When the other disciples saw him, they became jealous. They were envious. They also wanted to travel abroad, right? Maybe I'll also strike it rich. You go to another country. Speaking of rich, we made a Pesach program where we charged officially $45,000. I won't go into what bargains we're willing to give people because we can't have empty rooms. I see a Sukkot program being advertised right now. You want to hear the price? A Sukkot cruise on a very deluxe yacht. $175,000 per person. And they have clients, otherwise they wouldn't be advertising this. It's for very well. It's for the super, the mega wealthy. So just do that. It's a 10-day cruise. A 10-day cruise, because you can't leave Erev Yom Tov. So they're going to go 2 days before. All right. That's about $17,000 a day. And you could see magnificent sukkah on the boat, the non-Yom Tov days, stopping in all kinds of nice destinations. Anyone have some spare change? We got to find out who goes on that boat and ask them to help fund Chabad Seniors Club, right? And there are programs that charge a lot more. There are programs that charge $10,000, $20,000 a person for Pesach. But this tops it. This is a luxury cruise, a yacht, not a cruise. I mean, it's for some people, exactly, because there are people who have this type of disposable money. Anyways, in our story, the students of Rabbi Shimon, who was a student of Rabbi Akiva, they got jealous of their friend. He travels abroad, and he comes back to Israel, a gvir, a wealthy man. So when Rabbi Shimon became aware of this, he brought them all to a certain field near the village of Meron, and he began to pray. He said, "Field, become full of golden dinars." Guess what? Maybe that's why all the people go to Meron. They're searching for the gold, because immediately, the Medrash says, the soil began to produce golden dinars before their eyes. And he then said to them, if it is gold that you want, we'll take all the gold you want now. But you must know that he who takes riches now is taking their share of the world to come, for the sole reward for studying Torah is reserved in the world to come. As the verse says, and she laughs at the time to come. And none of Rabbi Shimon's students took the gold dinars. Interesting story. An extravagant display of miraculous powers was Rabbi Shimon's way of admonishing his students for preferring money over Torah study in Israel. And he warned them. He said, you could take the miracle money, but remember, it's going to come at a cost. It's going to come at an expense. It's going to cost you. You're going to come to the heavenly realm, and it's going to diminish your reward there. So what mattered to Rabbi Shimon was more the spiritual, the godly, that we should live a pious life, as we said yesterday. And the sages didn't accept Rabbi Shimon's opinion. They said people do need to earn a living, but Rabbi Shimon was of the opinion that you should spend more time in spirituality, Torah study, prayer, in spiritual pursuits, rather than going out to earn a living. Let's read another statement of Rabbi Shimon. He says, the verse says, Lo yamush sefer haTorah zemipicha. Moshe Rabbeinu said to the Jews, this Torah shall not depart from your mouth. So the question the Gemara asks is, are these words to be understood literally? So to dispel the notion, there's another verse that says, you shall gather your grain. And remember this teaching of Rabbi Shimon? We did this one yesterday. Oh, you weren't here yesterday. Okay, in this teaching, Rabbi Shimon tells us, it's a discussion. What does it mean the Torah should never leave your mouth? And then you have another verse that says, V'asafta deganecha. You should gather your grain. So how do you gather your grain if you're studying Torah all day? And from this, there were two sages, Rabbi Yishmael and Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai. Rabbi Yishmael was of the opinion that you need to divide your time. There's time for leisure, and there's time for pleasure, and there's time for study, and there's time for prayer. Divide your time. Rambam tells us all about that too. But Rabbi Shimon didn't agree. He said, how is it possible for someone to abandon their Torah study? You should sit and study day and night. And he quotes a verse for that too. The Torah says you should be engrossed in your Torah study day and night. It reminds me of another good story of Rabbi Yisrael Salanter, who was a Lithuanian Rav, who was once walking home late at night after he finished his Torah study, his candle, his lantern in the shul finished, the oil finished, and that was an indication, time to go home. It was well past midnight. As he's walking home, he sees another home in their town that has the light on late at night. He comes over. Whose house is it? the tailor. So he knocks on the door and he says hello to the tailor, or maybe this is the next day in shul, I don't know. But the story goes, he asks the tailor, what were you doing up so late at night? And the tailor says, as long as there's light in the lamp, there's time to mend. You get it? And Rabbi Yisrael Salanter took a great lesson. As long as there's light in the lamp, as long as we're breathing, as long as we're here, as long as we're able to do something, let's utilize our time in the right way. Maybe that was Rabbi Shimon's idea. His spirituality was so great, but it wasn't just a nice theory. He influenced people with his life view. Don't just work for a living, right? Do you work to live or do you live to work? Maybe that was his point. His idea was, God, do what God wants. Everything else will take care of itself. Now, what did Abaya say after that? Abaya said, many people have tried to listen to Rabbi Shimon and were not successful. Meaning, the Talmud doesn't seem to concede to Rabbi Shimon's Veltan Shalom. The Talmud doesn't agree with his perspective. So his view remains a very lofty and hallowed concept, a theory, and not one that the sages of the Talmud encourage that everybody has to pursue. What did you want to say, Bracha? You want to say something? Okay. So let's now go into the story of Rabbi Shimon in the cave. Okay. Here's another interesting story you might be familiar with. But when the Romans were looking for Rabbi Shimon, why were they looking for him? Do you remember that story? Rabbi Shimon was speaking with some other sages, and they were conversing about everything the Romans did to benefit Israel. Right? We mentioned the story yesterday. They built marketplaces and bridges and bathhouses and spas and coliseums and all these wonderful things. And each of the sages had a different reason. Rabbi Shimon said, they did not build it for our benefit, okay? Everything they established was for their own selfish purposes. They built marketplaces so they could promote more prostitution. They built bathhouses, spas to pamper themselves. They built bridges to collect taxes. They built coliseums for their own entertainment. That's why they built it. These words were not taken very well by the Romans, and they were seeking his life. As we said yesterday, Rabbi Shimon went into hiding. First, he went to a shul, and his wife would bring him food. But after some time, he moved from there. He realized he's endangering other people. So where did he move to? I think we were up to this story yesterday. He moved into a cave. And miraculously, a carob tree and spring water were created for them there. That's what they ate. That's why, in Lag BaOmer, many people have a custom of eating carobs. Anyone here like carobs? Buxer? Okay? And that's what they ate. And they had a spring of fresh water where I guess they were able to bathe as well. They did not have changes of clothes. Interesting why they didn't have a miracle that their clothing would come and change. But that wasn't the miracle they had. For 12 years, they stayed in that cave. And they only put on their clothing to pray. Otherwise, they covered themselves with leaves, and that's how they studied and slept. And the Gemara says that after they sat in the cave for 12 years, Elijah the prophet came and stood at the entrance of the cave. And what did Eliyahu Navi say to them? Eliyahu said, who will inform Bar Yochai that the emperor died and his decree for your execution was annulled? So you hear the news, you ready to leave? So they left the cave, and here's a fascinating thing. Rabbi Shimon and his son saw people who were plowing and sowing their fields. Do you think Rabbi Shimon likes people wasting their time plowing and sowing? That's not his kind of thing. And Rabbi Shimon said, these people are abandoning Torah study, engaging in menial tasks. Rabbi Shimon and Rabbi Eliezer began to burn the fields with their gaze. Imagine that. Which movie has that where you can look and the fire comes out? I believe it definitely in movies and in cartoons that we used to see as kids. A baskala, the heavenly voice came out and said, did you come to destroy my world? Go back to the cave. So they went back and they sat in the cave for another 12 months. When they emerged, while Rabbi Shimon had become tolerant of working people, his son, Rabbi Eliezer, continued to destroy the fields that he saw. But this time, listen to this. Each time Rabbi Eliezer would burn the field, Rabbi Shimon would retract the burning. I don't know exactly what, extinguish the fire. Imagine that. Anytime Rabbi Eliezer would strike, Rabbi Shimon would heal. That's what the Gemara says. And Rabbi Shimon said to his son, to Eliezer, he said, Boychik, my son, you and I suffice for the whole world. It's okay that they work. Our Torah study is enough. So here you have an interesting thing. By now, we understand, we see that Rabbi Shimon's first reaction was his idea that an intolerance. He said very clearly that people should not waste their time in the fields. But now he seems to be more tolerant, more accepting. And what's that? He mellowed a little bit. Well, he pivoted, he changed. He realized after another year in the cave, he began to see another perspective. While his idealism didn't seem to disappear, he certainly still felt that you have to have this spiritually lofty way of perspective in life. But he realized that people live, and not everybody's in that ideal state. Not everybody could live that way, and that's fine. But we see how much this transformation affected him. The Talmud describes what happened, what transpired right after this episode. The Gemara continues telling us that Rabbi Shimon changed. He became a completely different person. He wanted to help others in any way he could. And he offered his services at the first city that he arrived just after he left the cave. Says the Gemara. He asked the townspeople when he came. He said, is there anything that needs to be fixed? The people said to him, there's a place where some dead people were buried, but we don't know exactly where. And the Kohanim are troubled. Why? A Kohen cannot walk, obviously, on that road. I remember when I was in London, I spent a year in London 25 years ago in yeshiva. My brother lived in London at the time in a neighborhood called Golders Green, or just next to an area called Hendon. And my brother would invite us for Shabbos. We liked having guests. Now, sometimes I would walk with my friends, and we had a shortcut because there was a certain park that you could walk through, but that park also had graves and trees beautifully. London's got some magnificent parks, and the trees overlapped the graves. And basically, if you went through that shortcut, which cut like a half hour out of the walk, it was a much quicker walk. But one of my friends was a Kohen, and whenever he came with us, we had to do a longer walk. More to eat, right? Burnt more calories. Anyways, the people didn't know exactly where the burial sites were. So can the Kohanim walk? Which way the Kohanim are allowed to walk? And Rabbi Shimon said, is there anyone who remembers this place before the dead were buried here? One of the elderly said, I remember this as the place Ben Zakkai planted and cut peas that were truma, which may only be may only be done on ritually pure ground. Truma can only be planted, meaning if you're using the seeds of truma, I don't know the laws, all the halachas, although I'm learning in the Gemara now. So Rabbi Shimon planted some peas himself, and miraculously, the ground shook wherever a body was buried. Subsequently, the Gemara says, everywhere the ground was hard, he pronounced it ritually pure. The Kohanim could walk there. And every place that the ground was soft, what did he do in the soft areas? He marked it as impure. He said that must be a place where people are buried, and therefore the Kohanim cannot walk there. And what we see in this story is that Rabbi Shimon didn't wait for the problems to knock at his door. All of a sudden, he's a changed man. While previously he couldn't tolerate people taking a break from their studying, now he went right against the advice, his same advice, and he went out there looking for the problems. He went out looking how he could help. As the Gemara started off, that he turned to the community. What could I be of help with? That's what I tell my kids. That when you're, sometimes you see the kids stand around. It's an observation my wife and I make. We're not judgmental, of course, never. But it's an observation we make when we have a bunch of kids over. There's always some kids who are running. How could they help out? They're in the kitchen. They want to take the platters to the table. And there's always some kids who just stand there like this. Okay, which is fine. We don't mind. But it's an interesting observation. Okay? But what's the point? The issue that he found was only a small inconvenience. Okay? Only for the subset of that town's citizens, that they were Kohanim who maybe can't walk on the ground. And again, it doesn't seem, it's very different than the personality he had previously, where when he was burning the fields because people were taking a break from their studying. And how do we understand this? How did he change? Why did he change? We saw before that he lived this lofty, transcendental life, and now we're seeing a whole different Rabbi Shimon. Did he just get old and mellow out? Is that what happens? You tell me. When you get older, do you start taking things less seriously and easierly? Or as people get older, do they get more aggravated and more... Which one is it? More anxious. Okay. That's not good news for me, because I'm already an anxious. You got to work harder when you get older, okay? More energetic. I like that one. I could use more energy. More anxious. They're getting me very worried for us. I'm a warrior. I'm a born warrior. Yeah. My weapon. Oh. Okay, maybe we'll go from warrior to warrior. That's my weapon, okay? The good point. I like that. So let's understand, like we said at the beginning of our discussion, most people fall into one category or the other. Either I'm a warrior or I'm a worrier. Either I'm anxious or I'm relaxed. And I'm just always anxious. I just don't know why. Always anxious. But how do we transcend those feelings? How do we just take life more relaxed, more easy? Huh? Let go. Let it go. Let it go. Yeah. Learn more. Okay. So now Rabbi Shimon went back into the cave for another 12 months. What 12 years didn't do for him in the cave, 12 months did. He learned more. And here we see that he was able to exist in a different way. Maybe in both worlds, okay? Because he remained to be the great sage. He was still lofty, still spiritual. He was still aloof, but also empathetic and sympathetic and caring and kind and sensitive. And I think it's something that Rabbi Shimon teaches us, that we have to find a way that we could straddle both. I could be a proud Jew. I could stand for my values and my ethics and my morals and the things that I hold of tremendous value. And at the same time, I realized that I can't impose it on everyone. That's why we said yesterday, that was the mistake of the students of Rabbi Akiva. What was the mistake? Love everybody, but the question is, can you respect, can you tolerate, can you make space for another to prosper and grow in their way? And so we still have to understand a little bit more about Rabbi Shimon. We have a little bit of time left. So let's look at another story or two in the Gemara about Rabbi Shimon. Today's story day, but it's Talmudic stories. Now let's look at another text from the Gemara, and we'll see just how sensitive Rabbi Shimon was to the reality that most people can't live up to his ideal. Says the Gemara. This is Masechta Sukkah. If you're looking for it, it's Daf Mem Hey Amud Beis. Okay. The Gemara says Rabbi Shimon related I am able to absolve the entire world from judgment for sins committed from the day I was created until now. If Eliezer, my son, was with me, we would be able to absolve the world from judgment for sins committed from the day that the world was created until now. If Yotam ben Azia was with us, we would be able to absolve the world from judgment for all sins committed from when the world was created until the end of days. Sure. Very lofty. Now, if he was such a lofty and truly such an ideologue, then he would demand justice for these sinners, not seek their exoneration. Which one would you prefer if you had a choice? To exact judgment, retribution on sinners, or exoneration for them? Huh? Exoneration. Okay? Yeah, for sure you would only want exoneration. But Rabbi Shimon seemed to be a person who was a little bit more harsh. So yet he's looking for their exoneration. So what's the point again? I think while he said, don't squander your time working when you could study and pray and be spiritually involved. But at the same time, he had this unique ability to recognize that even sinners need to be redeemed and should not be doomed for eternity, but rather to look at the good in them. Okay? And that's something that's very important for us to realize as well, how to strike that balance. The Gemara says about him in Masechet Menachos that we just concluded in the Daf Yomi cycle. It's a few blot ago. Talmud said, Rabbi Yochanan said in the name of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, even if a person just recites Shema in the morning and evening, he's fulfilled the mitzvah of La Yamush Mipicha, that the Torah should not be removed from your mouth. Is this the same Rabbi Shimon who previously said the verse La Yamush, that the Torah should never leave your mouth, means you have to study it day and night? And yet now he's saying, if you said Shema in the morning and said Shema in the evening, you fulfilled that purpose. How does that fit the same man, the same person? Before he said, the Torah should not depart from your mouth means you have to study all day. If you're working, you're wasting time. And now he tells us, just say Shema in the morning, say Shema in the evening, you fulfilled your purpose. Which one is it? Torah study all day or just 2 paragraphs and call it a day? Depends who you are. That's a good point. Depends who you are. And that's a very, very profound idea. Thank you, Bracha. I think Rabbi Shimon's worldview, his Weltanschauung, his complex perspective, he was cognizant of the fact that there is the ideal, but there's also practical. Rabbi Shimon perhaps is telling us, ideally, you should spend your whole day studying. Study Torah. Don't worry about a livelihood. God will provide. You all know that, Maisa, right? Story 816. You see, you could just laugh. It's the story of the in-laws checking out. You know the difference between in-laws and outlaws, right? Outlaws are wanted. So the in-laws are checking out this prospective son-in-law for their daughter. Anyways, the father-in-law and mother-in-law each interview him separately. The mother-in-law says he doesn't look that religious, but between my daughter and I, we'll teach him about hell. The father-in-law says, oh, he's very religious. Every time I ask him how he's going to provide for my daughter and please God, their children, he always says, God will provide. Very religious. He thinks I'm God. God will provide. But Jewish law deals with every day, and in reality, Rabbi Shimon is aware that he can't legally mandate that everyone live within the ideal. So we have to understand, and like you said, how do we balance the two in our own lives? Are they mutually exclusive? Can you only be spiritual or only material? Well, to answer that question, I want to digress a little bit and delve into another topic of Kabbalah, again from the teachings of Rabbi Shimon. And we've all had this question one time or another. If God is so big, why would he care about little me or my good or my bad deeds? Doesn't God have more important things to worry about than my behavior? And it's a great question. The truth is, many philosophers have grappled with this for years. In ancient times, there were indeed some philosophers who believed in the concept of a creator, but they argued that this creator could hardly care about what happened in a mundane world. God created, and God leaves it for us to deal with now. They said while God dealt with the more spiritual stuff, he left the operation of his universe in the hands of heavenly forces, the stars, the constellations. And according to Jewish scholars, it was actually this erroneous belief that led to the first idol worshippers, where they thought that it's the constellations, it's the stars and the moon that were in control. So here's an interesting thing. Because God is qualitatively superior, he is seemingly suited to relate to things lower than him. And Rabbi Shimon reached a higher level where he could relate to God in a much higher way. How do I simplify this concept in Kabbalah? There are two ways God could have created the world. Let's call it evolution and revolution. Okay. In the evolution model, God creates a series of descending spiritual dimensions, each successively less ethereal than the one above it, until he arrives at our world. And the difference between God, each level, and the world is quantitative, meaning they're all made of the same stuff, spiritual energy. But God and the upper worlds have more of it, and us in the lower worlds, we have less of it. Okay, that's some deep ideas that some people look and understand. But there's another model that Kabbalah talks about, the revolution model. That is, there's God, and then boom, the universe is created in all its glory. God isn't just quantitatively greater than everything. God isn't just have more spiritual energy than the rest of us, but he's qualitatively greater. God consists of different stuff than the rest of creation. And the stuff that God consists of is in a different league than the stuff which everything else is made up of. God is a fancy wool suit, and the universe is this knockoff polyester. I'm not here to discuss what material God is, because we don't know, right? But God's not made up of any material per se, right? This is just illustrative. So let's unpack the difference between quantitative and qualitative. An example of a quantitative superiority would be a rich person relative to a poor person. If I were a rich man, all day long I'd chitty-bitty-bum. If I were a wealthy man, I wouldn't have to work hard. All day long I would chitty-bitty-bum if I were a wealthy man. Okay, so that's one difference. The rich man versus the poor person. The comparison is between assets, money. The rich person has, and the poor person doesn't. But there's a qualitative superiority scale that would be different. Maybe a wise person relative to a poor person. The wise person, why is he superior to the poor person? Maybe they both don't have things, right? The wise person is superior because wisdom is actually a greater commodity. Not because he has more of the asset than the poor person lacks, but because the wise person has the ability that is superior to what the poor person has. You see a big difference here? Which is why we are told that when King Solomon was offered from above. The option of riches or wisdom, which did he choose? Wisdom. And that's an interesting thing. There's an idea that we can understand and appreciate. In the context of a quantitative difference, in as much as the difference between the rich person and the poor person is reduced to how much money they have, it's hard for the rich person to relate to the poor person. And vice versa. They completely different worlds. In the very matter that they differ, they are two opposite ends of this broad spectrum that just can't meet. But that changes when the difference is qualitative. A wise person sees no problem associating with a poor person, because the quality that the wise person possesses over the poor person is nothing to do with what the poor person lacks. The wise person doesn't sit at the top of the spectrum and the poor person at the bottom, or vice versa. So let's just try to understand this theory and relate it to God, specifically that in the evolution model, the relationship between God and the world is a quantitative one. At the top of the chain, there's this hyper spirituality, and you gradually travel further away from God. You become successively less spiritual and qualitatively lower in relation to God. And that was the view that the nations of the world espoused, which led them to believe that God, being so much higher and superior and better than us, that God must have left the world in the hands of his minions, like the rich person who wants nothing to do with the poor person, because the rich person sees themselves as completely superior. But we understand that God's loftiness is not just a quantitative, but qualitative. God isn't just spirituality, but a different substance relative to everything else in existence. God is a creator, and we're all creations, including all physical and spiritual dimensions, my friends. So our lowliness doesn't contradict his greatness, because the metrics that we use to compare us are completely different. On the contrary, I would say because God is qualitatively superior, God is uniquely suited to relate to things lower than himself. And that, my friends, is something that we have to appreciate. And let's take a few more minutes to unpack that. Because I don't know, how did we get here? Well, we just discussed, is the TV back on? But the sound, who's put it back on when we had it? Oh, okay. So, my friends, the highest, we are told, is reflected in the lowest. And we tend to think that the loftier something or someone is, the less it will relate to the lower end of the scale. And that might be true, but only to a point. Once something is qualitatively superior to another thing, interacting with it doesn't contradict its loftiness, which is why there's no reason we should feel better, snob anybody with our nose, you know? And that was, in a sense, Rabbi Shimon, that we could learn from him. In as much as his superiority over the mundane was qualitative, being involved with the world was not a contradiction to his greatness. And maybe that's what happened when he learned a little bit more, and all of a sudden that switched for him, right? Like the light bulb turned on. That while he saw before that anyone who was engaged and involved in physical material things seemed to be doing the wrong thing. But he was so great that he realized that's not the way to see it. Can't just burn up all the fields because these people are wasting their time. And so reaching these great heights, this is something you can think about. It's interesting that after Rabbi Shimon comes out of the cave, while the first time around he destroys all those fields, and God says, you're not here to destroy my world, go back in. Doesn't that look like it's just isolating him more? Wouldn't it have made more sense for God to have instructed him that he should be interacting more with the world? Why does God tell him go back into the cave? And interestingly, over that year in the cave, Rabbi Shimon was elevated to this higher state of existence. While he spent a little bit more time in the spiritual, he was able to make more room for the physical. That he didn't any longer mock the peasant, the illiterate, the ignorant. His own teacher started off illiterate and ignorant and became the great Rabbi Akiva. So my friends, I think what we see here is that while there might be a great gap between things sometimes, but the truth is the greater that gap, sometimes the closer they can become. And so, yeah, you can have a great teacher, but sometimes the teacher can be so lofty that nobody understands a word they're saying. So I want to conclude with this point. Everything in this world, you could say, falls into different categories, right? What do they call it? Taxonomies? Yeah? So we have Domen, Sameach, Chai, Medaber. These four. There's inanimate objects like rocks, mountains, water, fire. Then we have Sameach. What's Sameach? Plants, trees, flowers, fruits. And they present more, they obviously have more life than stones. Everything has life. I'm not negating the life that a stone has and that water flows with. But we're talking about what do you call it? A different type of ability. Just a second. Yanni, can I call you right back?
I'm sorry, I need you for a minute.
Okay, hold on a second, everybody.
Fast.
Yeah. We'll wrap up here. Let me just see which other slides I wanted to show you here. This is deep ideas. We could continue this discussion tomorrow, please God. I also wanted to do some Nigunim with you tomorrow. So let's see how time goes. Okay, we'll conclude here for now. And to be continued.